In New South Wales, modelling predicts around 560 COVID-19 patients will need ICU treatment. And back home, Footpath dodgems. What's the measure of your 2-metre manners? Who goes first, chucking bikes and chihuahuas? Whew, stressful.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. All of New Zealand except Auckland will move to COVID Alert Level 2 at 11:59pm tomorrow. However, the Prime Minister has announced 2 major changes to the Level 2 rules. Jacinda Ardern says face coverings will be mandatory at most indoor venues and a maximum of only 50 people will be allowed to gather at those venues. Gyms, museums and libraries will also need to change the way they operate.
Previously, these venues have had no hard limit on how many people are allowed to be in a space, but instead, a 1 metre distancing rule is a proxy for how many people could be inside. We're now bringing these venues into alignment with the rules that exist for retail and supermarkets, which is 2 metres.
The limit for outside venues is 100. Cabinet will review the alert level settings for the whole country next Monday. Health officials still don't know how a Middlemore hospital patient who tested positive for COVID-19 got infected. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he is confident a link will be found, but the patient should ideally have been isolated when hospital staff thought they could be infected. The county's Manukau DHB is reviewing its practices to see if there was any delay in diagnosing the patient. All staff in the 2 affected wards are currently stood down. However, an emergency care specialist believes it would not be practical to test patients for COVID-19 before admitting them to hospital. John Bonning says some COVID symptoms are just too much like those of many other illnesses.
We look for people with fevers, aches, pains, flu-like illness. But the trouble is, if you add in kind of headache, abdominal pain, diarrhoea, vomiting, fever, muscle aches, respiratory symptoms, it's just about everybody that comes to the emergency department.
John Bonning says it would also take too long for results to return from pre-testing. The Maritime Union has deplored a big payout by Ports of Auckland to its former chief executive. Tony Gibson, who resigned in May, faces health and safety charges over a stevedore's death last year. The port's latest annual report shows a payment to a resigning employee of nearly $1.8 million. Union Chair Craig Harrison says that money went to Tony Gibson.
It was sickening, actually, to see there's been deaths at the port and the trauma that those families have gone through over the last year. And just to see someone walk away from the Ports of Auckland with so much money. And then over the years, I've seen workers lose their jobs for sometimes trivial stuff, and it's had a big impact on their lives, and there was nothing in the way of packages when they went.
A port spokesperson says the board had to take into account existing contractual arrangements with Mr Gibson, which are confidential. A leading Māori health expert says David Seymour's leak of a vaccination booking code for Māori undermines the huge amount of work being done to increase vaccination rates. The ACT Party leader tweeted a priority code that Māori can use to be vaccinated against COVID-19 without an appointment. Rawiri Jansen, who is the clinical lead of the National Hauora Coalition, says Mr Seymour is harming the good work of Māori providers.
He is showing complete disregard for our efforts to improve the vaccination program to reach Māori, who happen to be the lowest vaccinated population in the country, and I think his actions essentially are sabotage of our efforts to improve Māori health outcomes.
The west coast town of Reefton is at risk of running out of water because of a major reservoir leak. Residents are being restricted to essential water use while Buller District Council staff seek the source of the leak. A drop in the reservoir level was noticed on Friday. The chair of the Inanahua Community Board, John Bogan, says he suspects it's an old burst pipe on the outskirts of town, but it's the ultimate needle in a haystack. Moving into sports news now, the Warriors could find themselves stuck in Australia for Christmas. The club hopes to get players and staff who have been based in Australia this year home, but with no MIQ spots booked and plans to have all players in a pre-season camp on November 8th, travel restrictions could keep them across the Tasman. The club's chief executive, Cameron George, says he'll confirm later this week where the team will be based next year. The Black Ferns are refusing to dwell on their lack of test match play as they look ahead to their first international matches in 2 years. A 34-strong touring squad, which includes 12 newcomers, has been named for tests against England and France in October and November. The Black Ferns haven't played a test since mid-2019 in England, but France has been playing in the Six Nations competition. Captain Les Elder says that simply adds to the challenge ahead.
I'm not going to say we're playing catch-up because I don't want us to fall back onto that as an excuse. Many people have had it worse. Fortunately for us, we've been able to play some domestic rugby, but we just have to go in there with the mindset that it is what it is. Here's what we've got coming up. Here's the challenge ahead of us, and we'll walk towards it.
And that's the news.
A bystander tried to thwart the Newland terror attack.
I got probably too close and yelled at him, which got his attention. He was coming for me. Luckily, the police arrived at that point.
Sri Lanka is left reeling.
They're horrified, and they also feel that Sri Lanka's name has been kind of dragged through the mud with this single act.
And Countdown deliberates safety measures for stores.
I oscillate between thinking this is just dreadful and random and inexplicable to thinking, what else could I do?
Your Witness, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Partly cloudy with isolated showers. Rain spreading east for a time tomorrow. Heavy and possibly thundery. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today. Mostly cloudy tomorrow with rain for a time. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington. Cloud increasing. Rain for a time tomorrow. Then showers with possible thunderstorms in Kapiti. Bulla to Fiordland, rain or showers, heavy and possibly thundery at times. Snow to 500 metres in the south. Nelson and Marlborough, showers turning to rain tonight, heavy and possibly thundery, easing tomorrow evening. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, high cloud, rain or showers in Southland and Clutha from tonight, and snow lowering to about 600 metres tomorrow. Scattered rain elsewhere, mainly in the high country, nor'west gales in exposed places. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower tomorrow. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. More news and weather at 5:30.
Nā mihi, Sarah. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Welcome to the island of Auckland. From midnight tomorrow, the rest of the country moves to COVID alert level 2, while the super city stays super banged up at level 4. But it's a tougher 2 to keep ahead of the Delta strain. There's a limit of 50 people at inside venues like bars, cinemas and churches. That's half what it used to be at level 2. At outside venues, the limit's 100. Essential workers crossing Auckland's border must now show proof of a weekly COVID tests. Masks are a legal must inside most public venues, shops, malls, libraries and hospitality, but not schools. And there's Northland, which is separated from its other level 2 buddies. Ko taku manuhiri inai ko Chris Hipkins, COVID response minister. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora.
So, Delta level 2, maximum 50 people at inside venues. How many businesses do you reckon will not be viable with this new rule?
Look, that's a very difficult thing to calculate. A number of hospitality businesses would typically have less than 50 people in them at any given time at the moment anyway, or previously I should say anyway. It really depends on the size and scale of the business.
But cinemas, bars, wedding venues, concerts, theatres, they're all pretty much out because 50 people doesn't cover the cost.
I think that they've got more flexibility under level 2 than they've had previously under level 3 and 4. But the reality of dealing with COVID-19 is that we're stepping down because there is still a residual risk out there. And I think the last thing that people see and the last thing that those businesses and those venues want to see is us having to go back up alert levels because somewhere along the way the system fell down.
Can we just look at a practical example here, Minister? So, like one of our big shopping malls. So, is every shop inside that a mall allowed 50 people inside? And what about transit areas? I mean, how's it going to work practically?
So if you look at shopping malls and supermarkets and those sorts of retail venues, there's additional guidance for them that is based on the size of the venue, because obviously a small shop it should have fewer people in it than a large shop should. So additional guidance is available that will help the people running malls, supermarkets and other shops to be able to make the judgments as to whether or not they've got too many people in their store at any given time. And we've seen this happen already. Retailers have been doing it for a while now. You'll see people on the door of supermarkets counting the number of people who are going in, and when this starts to get too full, they tell people to pause and wait while other people finish their shopping, and then they let more people in. So there's guidance available to retailers on that.
So a review next week. What if there's no cases in the level 2 areas in that time? Will they drop down to the old level 2, or could they go straight to level 1?
Look, I don't have a crystal ball, and at this point it's really going to depend what we see and what we see in terms of. So we haven't made those decisions yet, and I won't get ahead of those.
Well, what keeps you at level 2 plus then? Let's look at it in the opposite way.
I think the reality is we have to acknowledge that Delta has changed the game. It's more transmissible. We know more about the way it transmits, which is it's an airborne virus, so people being in the same space can pick it up if they're sharing the same air. And so that's one of the reasons why we've gone through all of our alert level settings, particularly our level 2 settings, to identify how we can drive that risk down further. Smaller group sizes and fewer people in smaller spaces really does help.
So mask wearing mandatory for large venues, churches, restaurants, but not for kids in school. So why the inconsistency?
We've certainly said that we encourage mask use in schools. There will be some occasions where it's not appropriate. For example, when you're doing a PE class, mask use might not be appropriate, or probably won't be appropriate. But schools can make those kind of judgments. So therefore it is a recommendation that masks are used in a school environment where that is appropriate.
The internal border, and by that I mean the border around Auckland, you're asking for a testing regime now for essential workers who are crossing that border. Once a week they have to prove that they've had a COVID test. Are you going to set up a special centre for them? Will they be tested at the border? What constitutes proof?
There will be a range of testing options available to them. We're working with their employers and with all those involved in the transport logistics industry and so on to make sure that testing's available through their employers, and that'll include saliva testing. So we're working with saliva testing providers to make sure that we're rolling it out so that that's also available. And for those who are travelling, perhaps for personal reasons, and because they have an ability to travel under the very tight criteria there for travel for personal reasons, they will be able to go to their GP or to the places where they can currently go to get a test.
But you're not anticipating testing essential workers at the border?
Not at the border, but certainly working with their employers to make sure that testing is available to those who are crossing the border because of their work.
While we've been talking, Minister, we've been getting a few texts. It's about gyms, right? So there'll be crowds of up to 50 in gyms. Do they have to wear masks in the gym?
No, they don't have to wear a mask in a gym. That would be rather impractical. The size limitation in a gym does take into account the fact that people are going to be sweating. They're going to be doing those sorts of things. By reducing the size to 50, then that again helps to contain the risk.
Northland is essentially cut off from its other buddies at level 2. Right, at Delta level 2. How are you going to facilitate the free flow of people here from level 2 to level 2 when you got this monster island in the middle, which is Auckland?
So people will be checked if they're seeking to travel, say, from Northland to the Waikato. They'll be checked at the border at either end to make sure, first of all, that they are transiting through as they and that they know they have to transit through as they enter into Auckland, and they will be checked on the way out to make sure that that's exactly what they've done, that they've come in one end, out the other, without stopping along the way.
That sounds like queues, Minister.
It won't be a fast exercise. There will likely be queues at both ends. Yes, that's unavoidable.
So how are you going to make sure that they don't stop off on the way?
Look, that is one of the things that people will be interviewed about when they go through the border checkpoints, and of course there will be penalties for people who knowingly break the rules. But ultimately, people are expected to stay on the state highway and travel right directly through.
So you're operating a trust model for them, but you're requiring essential workers to be tested. Why not sample test some of these Northlanders who are passing through Auckland too?
Ultimately, these are people whose risk profile, if they are passing directly through, wouldn't suggest they should be subject to a mandatory testing requirement.
If they pass straight through, of which there are no guarantees?
Well, look, the alternative is to cut Northland off completely, and that's not
Did you look at that, Minister?
To do.
Did you consider that, though?
We have considered that, but that would be a particularly challenging thing for Northland.
Minister, do you realistically see the whole country at level 2 by Christmas time?
Look, I don't want to get ahead of that. I would say that I'm very encouraged by the overall trend in what we're seeing in our case investigations. So we're seeing fewer new cases pop that aren't linked. We're seeing more household contacts coming through as a proportion of the cases. So the overall case number, of course, has gone down. But in the smaller numbers, we're seeing higher proportion of them are known contacts, a higher proportion of them are household contacts, so therefore already being isolated. Those are encouraging trends.
So are you optimistic that we'll all make it to level 2 by Christmas? And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but people are sitting at home. They like to make plans. They've had a number of weeks of this already. They're getting fatigue. They just want, a glimmer of hope. Can you offer it to them?
My best advice to Aucklanders in particular is if you do want to go to the alert level sooner rather than later, hold your nerve, keep following the level 4 rules, because we're winning this at this point. The last thing we want to do is for people to get disgruntled and frustrated and start taking risks. Don't take risks. Now's not the time to take risks. Things are heading in the right direction. Hold your nerve and we can get through it.
Minister, very quickly, how many vaccine doses have you got in the country right now, and when is your next delivery?
I've got that piece of paper in front of me. If you would just give me a minute, I'll make sure I've got the right piece of paper.
Sure.
So the overall stock that we have at the moment, and this is a mix of what we've got in our central store and what we've got out at our distributed across the network, it's about 739,000. That was as of late last night, 739,000, and we will have more to say hopefully in the next couple of days on deliveries through the rest of the month.
Have you signed a deal with someone?
I'm hoping that we'll have more to say on that on the next
I know you're not
days.
going to give me the details, Minister, but come on, give us a bone here. Have you signed a deal? You don't need to tell me what the deal is, but have you got something signed up?
We are very close to being able to give people more certainty about what's coming in and when. We've been very careful not to get ahead of that. I've been very reluctant to even talk about it until we've got something signed, sealed, and all of the various boxes ticked. And I'm hoping that we'll be in a position to be able to say more about that in the next days.
Thank you, Minister. That is Chris Hipkins, the COVID Response Minister. Ho mai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What do you think of the level changes if you're in Auckland or outside of Auckland, and some of the new rules, right? So 50 is the maximum number at an inside venue and much more mask wearing. But no mask wearing in schools, although they are recommending it. Pātui mai, text me 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is almost 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mō te whakarongo mai e haere aki nei. Retailers look to boost security after last week's attack. Neighbours of the Middlemore terrorist are shocked such a dangerous person was living in their West Auckland street and question why the authorities allowed it. Ahmed Atil Muhammad Samsudeen was living in the annex of Masjid Ibalil, a small Islamic centre, since his release from prison in July. Residents there are worried about a backlash, and the president of the Muslim Association wants answers. Chen Liu reports.
The mosque in Glen Eden, where the attacker was living, has been cordoned off, but today the police tape is gone. Blair, who lives and runs a plastic recycling business in the neighbourhood, describes a close encounter with Samsudeen. He noticed something odd when his outdoor sensor lights went on.
The man in question was here 2 Saturdays ago at 6:30 in the morning on my seat, and I chased him off.
Blair says he only realised Friday's attacker was the man who lived nearby when Samsudeen was pictured on television. He says neighbours had no idea.
Not happy that we weren't informed in the street that we had a bad case here and we weren't told.
Another neighbour says the authorities have let them down by housing a known threat there. He says the area could have been placed in danger.
Our workers on site, he could have just walked down here, so we wouldn't have known. So, yeah, at least if we'd had some warning, we could have taken some precautions, but I think it's unfair just to put that in the middle of our community.
Muslim woman Sabina lives close by with her family. She doesn't pray at the mosque as it's men only. On Friday, she saw police cars on her street and was shocked to find out what had happened on the news.
As a Muslim, we condemn the attack. As a Muslim, we're not allowed to kill human being. If we kill one human being, it's like we kill the entire human being on earth.
Sabina says she feels the street is safe, but she has heard about racism towards some Muslims since the attack and is calling for understanding.
If you have a Muslim neighbor, talk to them, get to know them. They're not like that. They're not like the terrorists.
Her husband, Wawan Ruzwana, prays daily at the mosque, but he didn't know Sam Suding. He worries that some people here might view Muslims differently in the light of the attack, as he and his wife have been subjected to racism before, including after the Paris terrorist attacks in 2015.
It's not only first time, 2 times, 3 times she's been spat on, but we just like, yeah. Even they just call her terrorist straight away without knowing her or anything. Yes. Or I say, go back to your country.
Wawan Ruzwana has a simple message.
Love each other, be humble. Doesn't matter what happened.
The Muslim Association president is Ikhlaq Kashkari. He says the police and the corrections were in talks with the association since 2018 about guidance and any counselling for Sam Suding while he was in custody and upon his release. But he did not know until Friday that the attacker had been living in an apartment belonging to Masjid Ibn Lau since July when he was released from prison.
Glen Eden Mosque, it's a very small Islamic centre, and it does not have capability and capacity, in my view, to be able to support something like this. So I really like to myself understand the rationale and logic behind corrections deciding to go to Glen Eden Mosque.
He questions the arrangement to house Sam Suding in Glen Eden and wants answers.
That absolutely baffled me, and I just found it hard to accept. I think there is more to it than what's been said in public.
Mr. Kashkari also wonders whether Sam Suding could have been managed differently by corrections and other authorities.
I feel that they did not want to have formal accountability once he was out.
Ikhlaq Kashkari says faith has nothing to do with Friday's attack, and the Muslim community stands with the victims.
It is 22 minutes past 5. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. All of New Zealand, apart from Auckland, will move to level 2 tomorrow night, but the limit on gatherings has changed. 50 for indoor events and 100 at outdoor events. Caroline Harvey-Tier is the Chief Executive at Venues Otutahi, which oversees the Christchurch Town Hall, Christchurch Arena and Orange Theory Stadium. She joins me now. Good evening, Caroline. How viable is it to run sort of event venues when you're only allowed 50 people in them?
Well, short answer is it's not viable, really. Look, we understand that mass gatherings have been the source of a lot of outbreak, but to be fair, the cautious approach is starting to really debilitate us. We made some big changes last year and we downsized by 60%. We lost 50 members of our team. So that's well positioned us to respond to a situation like this. We can kind of contract, but in all fairness, gatherings of 50, particularly inside, we're big inside venues, we do big events, and yeah, it isn't a viable or sustainable position to be in.
So did your heart sink a little bit with the announcement?
I don't think I was surprised. I think my heart sank when it just constrained a little further. I think we always expected to be under restriction until such time as the vaccination program was at a point where we had confidence in our ability to gather en masse, but I probably didn't expect it to be quite so constrained. It really does pretty much take us out at the knees.
So, Caroline, if you are thinking that you're going to be constrained until most of the vaccination rollout is complete, that takes us through to December. So were you picking that you're not going to have big concerts, big theatre attractions, anything like that until the end of the year?
Look, we're hoping that's a conservative assumption, but it's certainly the assumption that we're doing all of our planning on. Our original assumption, and obviously we haven't had time to do any revised modelling, was on that 100 gathering. And we had about 103 events scheduled between now and Christmas. and about a quarter of those could go ahead under that sort of 100 packs gathering or a particular pods. But now that we're under, and I don't know how long 2.5 will go for, it could become a little more lenient, but it certainly, that takes it down to about 10% of those gatherings.
So in the short term, as you say, we don't know how long this sort of souped up level 2 will last, but say over the next month, will there be events that fall off your calendar or have to be cancelled if you were still at this Delta level 2, and what are they?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think I don't know exactly what they are because, as I say, it hasn't been long enough to probably since the announcement to do the modelling. But look, if it's 10%, it would be a handful. And actually, the guest experience isn't great at 50. Even if you were to do pods, you think about an occasion like a banquet dinner, or you sort of break it up into pods. You do lose that atmosphere, you lose that feeling of gathering. And things like expos, school prize givings, you can't really divide them up. There's too much interaction between parts of that event.
So what about the other restrictions? Masks as well, and having to record visitors and QR coding. How much more, pressure or complication does that put on you as well?
Look, I think we were prepared for that, and it's not something new. It's just probably a little more rigour around it, particularly mandatory scanning at venues. So look, we are prepared for that, and that's just really an ability to resource that appropriately to make sure that we are delivering what we need to be delivering and keeping everyone safe.
Caroline, not wanting to dwell on Auckland's predicament, but with Auckland in level 4 and no indication when it's moving downwards, could that actually be an advantage to you? Potentially, could people move further down the island and be looking at stadiums and arenas like yours because they can't achieve their event in Auckland?
Look, potentially, yeah, and look, any opportunity like that we would wholeheartely welcome. There's just our ability to actually continue to deliver those events. That'll be the constraint on that opportunity, which would really help us.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Caroline Harvey-Tea, who's the Chief Executive at Venues Otutahi. We all know the rules. You can get your fitness fix in lockdown, but only if you maintain a 2-metre buffer. But with Auckland's footpaths seemingly busier than ever under level 4, we wanted to see whether people are keeping to the COVID code. Even if you try your best to stay distanced, is it always possible? Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe went for a stroll in the sun.
Lockdown workout, time in the sun to keep you sane. Some walk and take in the view while runners are in the zone. There's push bikes, e-bikes and even scooters. It's one of a few freedoms under level 4, but like most things these days, there are rules. Give a wide berth, 2 metres to be exact. It's a sunny morning near Westhaven Marina. The footpaths are full, the cycleways swamped, so we ask passers-by whether keeping your distance is always doable.
Yep, but you've got to be alert and move away. People are, maybe because of you, this is the best day I've seen of people shifting to the sides.
Then, right on cue, a runner brushes past.
Watch this. That was a metre away. He didn't give a stuff.
We wander under the bridge round the corner to the Westhaven boardwalk, where etiquette seems a little better.
Here it's possible because there aren't the volume of people. However, in supermarkets it's frightful, really.
But it can be difficult when you're trying to control 2 kids swerving the footpath on bikes and scooters.
They're pretty good. They understand now. This is, I don't know how many lockdowns I've been into, but yeah, they get the idea. But whether they follow or not is another story.
And since this is a story about exercise, I decide to slip into something a little more appropriate. Picture a pasty Pākehā, about 6'2", peeling off his RNZ jacket to reveal an ill-fitting gym top, swapping pants for short shorts, off come the boots, on goes something a little speedier. A quick stretch and I'm off, weaving in and out of people pounding the Westhaven boardwalk. There's dogs to contend with, Aucklanders walking 2 or 3 abreast. At least once I come closer to 2 inches, let alone 2 metres. It's approaching lunchtime. Foot traffic is building. A man approaches with 3 chihuahua. I want to know, how do you distance with 3 chihuahua?
Well, interesting enough, people don't approach me like they used to. So like kids would run up. So that doesn't happen during lockdown. And actually I quite like that.
We run into another dog walker passing under the Auckland Harbour Bridge. Safe to say he's not impressed with the distancing efforts of some.
There's a lot of people at the moment out walking, which is great, walking their dogs. Then you've got cyclists on there, speeding along there. I mean, they've got to be smart about it and put cyclists on the road and keep so everyone can keep their distance.
Suddenly, we find ourselves in the middle of the age-old bitter battle between walker and cyclist.
It's impossible to be not at 2 metres. Absolutely it is. And as I said, it makes it worse with cyclists. And I've got nothing against cyclists, but you've got cyclists speeding along there, so you're spread all over the place. I think that's probably only 3 metres wide.
So, in the interests of balance, we seek out some cyclists. Is keeping 2 metres easier said than done?
No, it's not always possible. If people are coming the other way two abreast, it can be quite difficult.
Off to the side of the walker-cyclist turf war, this time over distancing, we approach a lone fisherman casting near the edge of the footpath below the Auckland Harbour Bridge. He says trawling can be tricky on the cramped footpaths of Level 4.
You always have to be careful here when you're fishing off the footpath, mostly with cyclists. It's the cyclists on the footpath you cause the most problems. The walkers, no issue. You can see them coming.
So, with footpath space more in demand than ever, 2 metres at all times seems a bit of a stretch.
E te iwi e haere aki nei a Checkpoint. Otago University epidemiologist Michael Baker is live to talk about the level decision. The outgoing Ports of Auckland CEO, who is now facing health and safety charges, was paid close to $1 million when he left the company. And lockdown style, or, well, lack of it, what should go to Alert Level 4 outfit? Tracky-dackies or something a bit more Zoom-tastic? Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Mask wearing, Delta Level 2 constraints, 50, limits of 50 in inside venues, anything that's on your mind. And also footpath manners after that track from our two Nicks. That'll be up on our Facebook page if you want to check it out. How are you finding people's footpath manners? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko Sarah anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. All of New Zealand, with the exception of Auckland, will move to Alert Level 2 at 11:59 p.m. tomorrow, but will have to follow tighter rules because of the Delta variant. They include mandatory mask wearing in most public places and indoor hospitality venues, and will be limited to 50 people. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says there will be an ability for people in Northland to travel through Auckland for work if they need to, although essential workers crossing alert level boundaries will be required to undergo weekly testing. Schools and other education providers will open Thursday morning. Auckland remains at alert level 4 for at least another week. There will be a further review of level 2 and Auckland settings next Monday. Questions are being asked about whether a payment made to the former Ports of Auckland CEO is fair to the victims' families. Tony Gibson resigned in May and is now facing health and safety charges over a stevedore's death last year. The latest annual report from the ports shows a payout to a resigning employee of around $1.78 million. Independent Māori Statutory Board Deputy Chair Tau Henare wonders whether the victims have been shortchanged. Police investigating Friday afternoon's terror attack at Middlemore have completed their scene examination. 4 of the injured remain in hospital, all in a stable condition. One of the 3 people in intensive care is expected to be moved to a ward today. And finally, the Deputy Mayor of Masterton has been stood down from one of his official roles after slamming critics of a civic centre project. Graham McClymont wrote to the letters to the editor section of the Wairarapa Times Age and said the same group of grumpy old white men were bashing the proposed $30 million civic centre, calling it a swept-up woolshed. Those are your headlines. Our next news update is at 6.
Kia ora e ho no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa I nai nei, ko Nicholas Poynton, who is in our Auckland newsroom, ready to talk business. Nicholas, so bank complaints are on the rise.
Yes, this is the latest report from the Banking Ombudsman scheme, whereby the Ombudsman collects and publishes the complaints banks receive every quarter. They provide an overview of the types of issues customers are reporting and how banks respond as part of this wider initiative to encourage the banks to learn from customer complaints and improve their services accordingly. Now, the latest report shows complaints by consumers are up 6% on last year to about 3,100. But interestingly, the number of complaints that were escalated to a dispute, that fell 3% to 140. And the Ombudsman says this rise in complaints is down to customers being more willing to seek help when they encounter an issue with their bank, and says the reduced disputes, that's down to its early resolution service. Now, the most common types of complaints were about banks were with regard to lending. This was followed by other issues relating to payment methods. Also, the Ombudsman and also banks received a number of complaints about branch closures and the end of cheques as a form of payment. However, 96% of these problems were resolved in just a matter of days. The Ombudsman, Nicola Sladen, says her focus now will be keeping a close eye on the banks during this lockdown period to see how they are managing customers, especially those that find themselves in hardship, who are really under sort of financial pressure at the moment.
Nicholas, it's a whole other topic, who's complaining about there not being checks anymore. But let's move on to honey. Honey exporter Comvita looks to team up with Hollywood's finest. Well, our listeners will decide if they're Hollywood's finest. Who are they?
Well, look, this was a story that really piqued my interest today because the Manuka honey exporter Comvita has partnered with one of America's most powerful and some may say controversial sports and entertainment agencies to market a new line of products. So to get to the details, Comvita, they've entered into a partnership with the US brand development company called Caravan. Now, this is a joint venture with Creative Artists Agency, otherwise known as CAA. And they represent some of the best-known actors, artists and sports stars in the world. Everyone from Nicole Kidman to Lady Gaga to Cristiano Ronaldo. Their reach and roots within the entertainment elite is truly unparalleled. And through Caravan, CAA uses it to help its high-profile clients build companies around their personal brands. So this new partnership between Comvita and Caravan will see the creation of a celebrity-backed lifestyle brand that promotes the healing properties of Manuka honey and propolis, most likely through a topical cream. Unfortunately, Comvita's chief executive was not forthcoming on who that celebrity or celebrities might be, nor when those products may be coming out. But the company, they see this move as a significant step towards increasing its reach within the US market. They say many countries around the Asia Pacific, they understand the natural benefits of Manuka honey, but this is not so well understood in the US. So they help with celebrities pushing slickly branded Manuka creams on Instagram and may lead more people in the US to seek out other products Comvita sells.
Nicholas, shall we take a spin around the markets then?
Yes, the NZX couldn't quite make up its mind today. It did end up closing up 11 points at 13,300. The dollar is trading at 71.4 US cents and 96.1 Australian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Ka kite, Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. Level 2 looms for the whole country outside of Auckland tomorrow night, but it's level 2 with a Delta flavour. Gatherings will be limited to 50 people at indoor venues and 100 people at outdoor venues. The past 48 hours has seen the number of new community COVID cases slow to 20 a day. But at the moment in Auckland, testing rates are less than a third of what they need to be to make sure there aren't Delta cases going undetected in the community. Well, joining me now is Otago University epidemiologist, Professor Michael Baker. Good evening, Michael. Delta plus sort of level 2, does it go far enough for your liking?
Yeah, kia ora. Well, look, there's many positive features about this revised alert level 2. And of course, it's recognising that this virus is transmitted very easily indoors with aerosols that have a big range, and that the 1 and 2 metre rules are not really enough. So I think the big advance here is this recognition we saw at alert level 4 and 3 that people need to be wearing masks indoors. And I think that's a real advance for New Zealand that does reflect how this virus is transmitted. And also, I think the acceptance that we have to have fewer people in these indoor environments, because we've seen these super spreading episodes already happen in this outbreak.
In saying that, though, isn't there sort of conflicting messages? Because what about workplaces? Some workplaces might have 1,000 people coming and going a day. And by that, I mean office environments. And also then we've got schools who are not, well, it's not mandated that their students have to wear masks. What do you think of those discrepancies?
Yeah, look, there are inconsistencies. And actually, the one that I'm most concerned about is schools. And we remember this from early in the pandemic when we got masks added into public transport and aircraft, but actually school buses were exempt from that. And we're seeing that same split still in there, that we're not really applying the same approach, particularly to secondary school age students in these various settings. And I think that's a real gap. And there's two problems with this. One is it means the children are missing out on one of these essential protections if we do get an outbreak. And of course, they are great at transmitting the virus to their families. And the other opportunity I think we're really missing here is the one about education that we found with hand washing. It was school students who learned how to wash their hands properly and would take this message home to their families, who in many cases were not actually that diligent. And they were setting the bar higher. And so I think we're really underestimating the potential for school students to be real leaders in this area.
So if you had your way, would you mandate mask wearing in high schools?
Yeah, high schools, perhaps even intermediate age students as well. I think it's more optional in primary school age students, but internationally they are wearing masks month after month overseas. So it's not impossible. It's just that might be the next step for New Zealand. But no, I think this is quite a gap, missing out on high school students.
So what about your advice for the office environment then?
Well, again, office environments, as we know, are very diverse, and it's really a matter of looking at ventilation and mask use in all indoor environments. So I think that's what we've got to get used to now, certainly at alert level 2.
But then we've also got the gym scenario, right? Which, from everything that I've heard you talk about before, it's probably the worst breeding ground. People in close proximity, sweating and huffing and puffing over each other. I mean, again, inconsistencies.
That's right. And as you probably know, we recommended that we have 2 alert level 2 bands, if you like. One, this alert level 2 plus. I mean, it sounds a bit pedantic, but actually it does make a real difference. At the lockdown levels or stay-at-home orders, we have 2 bands. We have alert level 3 and 4. We think we need to do the same at alert level 2, to have these 2 gradations. And in some ways, it would actually mean that we could move down the alert levels faster. So we could have perhaps a week at this alert level 2 plus, which put a real damper on this virus being transmitted indoors by not even opening these high-risk venues at all. And we wouldn't hopefully need to spend much time at that level, and then move down to a more permissive alert level 2 generally at that point.
So they are introducing internal border testing, right? The border around Auckland, essential workers will have to produce proof of a weekly test. At the same time, there's going to be people transiting through Auckland from Northland to other level 2 points along the way. How comfortable are you with that?
Yeah, well, I think in principle it sounds good. I think the application will be challenging with people crossing through Auckland. But actually, we do need to do something with these essential workers crossing the border. That's still the biggest weak point in what is otherwise a very effective measure for dampening down this virus and eliminating it. The alert level 4 is tough on the virus, and we've got this weak point with the essential workers. And in many ways, it's somewhat analogous to people travelling, say, from Australia at the moment, flying across borders into New Zealand. We would always require, before we completely closed the border, of course, we did require this pre-travel test that had to be thoroughly documented. So we are going to roll out that similar level of testing, but it's not quite ready to go yet. And there is a talk about perhaps having saliva testing. It's still the same PCR test. It's still a very sensitive test. So I think there's real implementation challenges here.
The one thing a lot of people will want to know, and nobody wants to give their predictions, so I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but here goes. By Christmas, where do you see us? You know, is the whole country going to be back at level 1, or is level 1 a thing of the past now?
I think level 1 is possible again. And we just forget that we have enjoyed the highest level of personal freedoms of any country, certainly in the OECD, possibly in the world, over the last 18 months. So our expectations are high. It is possible we could return to an alert level 1 of some form, but I think it would need to be modified. We would have, for example, mandatory scanning in or signing in is, I think, here to stay at all levels. But yeah, look, I think we could enjoy a very high level of freedom in the medium term. The big question is, once we're highly vaccinated, where do we go with this pandemic? Do we sustain elimination for a much longer period, or do we transition to some other state of living with this virus, if that's possible?
We're almost out of time, so if I could get it in one word. Medium term is how long in your mind? How many months before we get to more freedoms?
Oh, I think perhaps 2 months.
Brilliant. Appreciate your time. That is Michael Baker on the alert level changes today. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hei muriaki na pita pita kōrero after the news at 6. Does lockdown mean more people are reaching for a booze bottle? The ACT Party leader David Seymour is under fire tonight for publishing a priority access code Māori can use to get vaccinated without making an appointment. Whānau Ora's no booking system began on Saturday in an effort to boost low vaccination rates among Māori, a people most at risk of dying from Covid-19. Te Aniwa Huri Hanganui reports.
It was not a political stunt. It was designed to inform the public what the government's up to. That's what we call opposition. And as a result, you're all here asking questions about it.
David Seymour fronting up after sharing on social media a special code Māori can take to any Whānau Ora vaccination site to avoid booking an appointment. He says not only is the initiative unfair, but it's unnecessary.
There's been no difference in accessibility to vaccination. The implication of that publication by the government today is that actually they believe Māori are unable to book vaccination. That is completely wrong. It is divisive, and ACT stands against it.
No one is suggesting Māori cannot physically book a vaccination, but the numbers speak for themselves. Māori are the least vaccinated group in the country, and that's a serious problem because they're most at risk of dying if they contract the virus. Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency CEO John Tamihere says Māori aren't stupid, but a no-booking system gives them one less reason to put vaccinations off.
When you've got 2/3 of your population struggling on incomes under $50,000 and a half of them under $28,000, the priority of going to vaccinations is not the same as well-off, entitled, privileged people like Mr. Seymour and his colleagues.
COVID-19's deadly threat to Māori became all the more real 3 days ago when a Māori woman in her 90s became the first New Zealander to die from the Delta variant.
We've got a nanny up here that passed away 3 days ago and she isn't even cold. She's the first Delta death. You know, and this guy, he's got no respect, none, on what is to occur in our communities.
Co-chair of the National Hauora Coalition, Dr. Rawiri Jansen, was horrified to see what Mr. Seymour had done. He says Māori have been working tirelessly to protect their vulnerable communities to try to avoid any more deaths, and his actions undermine that.
I think it's disgraceful. It's really disappointing. I think he is showing complete disregard for our efforts to improve the vaccination program to reach Māori, who happen to be the lowest vaccinated population in the country. And Māori are the most at-risk population in the country from COVID. I think his actions essentially are sabotage of our efforts to improve Māori health outcomes.
Māori Party co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Peka is urging anyone who isn't Māori to show some humanity and ignore David Seymour's code if they see it.
Well, I'm just hoping that the hundreds of people that are lined up to prepared to go and get vaccinated don't see distracting comments like that, and we're able to keep focused He's hit an all-time low today, this morning, which is bloody disgusting.
David Seymour has spent the afternoon defending questions and criticism about the leak, but his words and views won't stop Māori communities from getting on with the mahi and ensuring their whānau are protected.
Ports of Auckland workers are furious that outgoing chief executive was paid close to $1 million as he left the company. Tony Gibson resigned in May and is now facing health and safety charges over a stevedore's death last year. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Before leaving the Ports of Auckland, Tony Gibson was on a salary of around $820,000. He was the highest paid employee there. But the latest annual report from the ports shows payment to a resigning employee of between $1.78 and $1.79 million in the last financial year. The Maritime Union of New Zealand chair, Craig Harrison, says that payment went to Tony Gibson.
It was sickening, actually, to see, there's been deaths at the port and the trauma that those families have gone through over the last year. And just to see someone walk away from the Ports of Auckland with so much money. And then over the years, I've seen workers lose their jobs for sometimes trivial stuff, and that's had a big impact on their lives, and there was nothing in the way of packages when they went. So it seems to be a rule for one and a rule for others.
There have been 3 deaths linked to the ports in recent years. Last year, a stevedore was killed when a container he was helping lash dropped on him during an overnight shift. Gibson is now facing health and safety charges over that incident, and his first court appearance is scheduled for later this month. Tau Hinari is a member of the Independent Māori Statutory Board and says it's incredibly frustrating to see how Mr Gibson has been treated compared to the whānau of the deceased.
The whānau that, and there have been 2 or 3, I'd be really interested to know what sort of remuneration or awhina that they have got in terms of money wise, and put that up against what Tony Gibson got as a walkout, as a congratulation, as a pakite.
He says the board are also complicit in allowing Mr Gibson to receive the money. Hinari wants the entire board to go and for stronger legislation around council's control of ports organisations.
There's no doubt that if they had have said no, you're not getting anything, and you've actually brought the Ports of Auckland into disrepute, then he would have lawyered up to the hilt, and it would have cost the ratepayer, I suppose, as much as it did now. The fact remains, though, that this is such a privileged operation. All you need to do is look at where this guy lives, what he drives around in, what sort of salary he is on, and what did he do?
Employment lawyer Catherine McKinney says $1 million is a significant payout for any departing executive.
When someone of a senior level leaves, sometimes a separate new agreement is reached, an exit agreement, and they often do come with confidentiality clauses around them as well, which might have formed part and parcel of this exit sum.
Craig Harrison says Tony Gibson's contract should never have been allowed to include such a significant payout.
So when they had the first death on the port, surely the alarm bell should have been going off and the package should have been re-looked at and what was going on. And then with the automation keep getting kicked out, there must be some way that they could have readdressed the package or the parachute clause, for want of a better word. It just seemed to be they've let it go, and he's walked away.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the Ports of Auckland said the board had to take into account existing contractual agreements between the company and Mr Gibson, which included confidentiality.
Facial recognition and body cameras could be on the horizon for shop staff after Friday's terror attacks and increasing in-store aggression. 7 people were injured at the Newland countdown and the terrorists were shot dead by police. Greg Harford is the boss of Retail New Zealand and joins me now. Greg, what kind of behaviour have you been seeing and experiencing in stores?
Look, what we've been seeing over the last few years has been a steady increase in aggression and outright violence by customers or members of the public towards retail staff. The incidents, the tragic incident on Friday was probably the worst that we've seen, but it is part of a broader picture of really antisocial behaviour that we're experiencing in retail.
What are you talking about? Punching, spitting? What kind of things?
It ranges everything from abuse and general bullying through to spitting, through to abuse, through to grabbing people's hair, and we have seen cases of some quite serious assaults in retail. And everyone who works in retail should be able to go to work every day, feel safe at work every day, and go home safe.
So you've been talking about some of these technologies prior to, obviously, the attack last week, but facial recognition and on-body cameras, I mean, how do you think they would help?
Well, I think a key issue is that many of the people who are engaging in antisocial behaviour in store are repeat offenders, if you like. They've carried on this behaviour in one premises and they've gone on to another. I think if there was a good, perhaps information sharing between retailers and certainly some good systems that would flag up people of concern, then it makes it much easier for in-store staff to A, be aware that there's a potential problem and B, manage it.
Body cams, how useful are they at de-escalating situations?
Well, I think the experience is that they are quite useful. People do tend to be a little more restrained when they realise that they're immediately on camera, and there's something like that, some businesses will certainly be thinking about.
You know that there are people at home and their toes are starting to curl at the mere mention of facial recognition, eh?
Look, it's not an ideal situation. The reality is that retail workers, retail managers need to be able to go to work and stay safe. Nobody wants to be in a world where we need to have these sorts of technologies at play. But the reality is that the levels of unpleasantness and threats and violence that we're seeing in retail are just not acceptable.
How far off are these technologies then in terms of being actually introduced in stores, do you think?
Look, I think they're probably a little way from being widespread, but they're certainly being used overseas quite successfully in some cases, and I think we'll be looking, there will be businesses that are certainly thinking about trialling them in the not too distant future. But they will be used alongside other techniques to help manage these situations as well, whether that's just having more dedicated security staff in store, making sure that staff are more visible. There's a range of things that businesses will be doing.
Thanks for your time this evening. That is Greg Harford, who's the CEO of Retail New Zealand. Lockdown means we're at home almost 24/7, so what are people choosing to wear each day? Is it pyjamas and sports gear on repeat, or are some people actually getting dressed up for work? Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi investigate.
The few places graced with our presence right now are the supermarket, pharmacy, or perhaps a vaccination centre. That means the chance of seeing someone we know is very low, and the judgment from work colleagues is only waist up on Zoom. So what has that meant for the way we dress? At Auckland's Domain, leisure wear seems to be the outfit of choice as people exercising soak up the sun.
I'm sick of wearing spandex though. Get up and wear the same things every day, which is a bit tedious. But probably nice to go out and put something different on.
I don't really dress up. I'm a little bit lazy.
This lady admits standards are slipping in her household.
Some of my older kids look a bit tragic in the morning these days. Don't wash your hair quite so often. It's probably a couple of days.
For this couple, they're maintaining their usual clothing routine to avoid that happening.
We get out and about and we're wearing the same clothes and we go for a walk.
This is what I wear all the time, yeah. So.
But still enjoying the home comforts.
We probably get into the pyjamas earlier than normal.
Others are conscious to keep things stylish, but not fussing over looking perfect.
I've just gone really casual, hardly wear any makeup. I'm not as into it just simply for that reason that you're not seeing people, which is a bit depressing. I don't wear my rings or sort of put on nice earrings or, think, what am I going to wear today? I just sort of get up and put on what's there.
And yes, sometimes that means dressing up for the supermarket.
I think I am still trying to dress nice. Particularly today because it's sunny. That whole look good, feel good sort of thing.
At this vaccination clinic in Epsom, Steve has dressed up for the occasion in a blazer.
Yes, this is the first time I've been out of track pants in 2 weeks.
You've dressed up to get your vaccination?
I have, yeah, because, formal Friday, make an effort.
Fantastic. So this is your outing, make it an occasion.
Exactly right. Got to take the wins when you can get them.
He's encouraging others to give it a go.
The other day I just put on a shirt and blazer for work, even though I was sitting in my house, just to do something different.
With at least another week at level 4 left for Auckland, it's the perfect time to experiment with a lockdown wardrobe.
And if you were listening to that, Louisa Marika's piece will be on our Facebook page. Let us know what you're dressed in for lockdown 2101. COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins is wanting to clarify his comments regarding gyms in Delta Alert Level 2. No masks are required at the gym. He says there's no cap on the number of people allowed in the gym at Level 2. However, people will need to keep 2 metres distance from each other inside the gym unless they are family or friends from the same bubble. Got it? Well, I think we could probably put that up on our Facebook page as well. On the subject of footpath etiquette, Terry says, manners on the footpath are easy. Apply the road code, keep left and give way. Someone else says if only people would keep to the left, be consistent instead of weaving all around in front of you as you both decide which side to pass. And Brian, love you, Brian. Brian says, God, I need a haircut. Me too, Brian. So does Calvin in the control room.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. All of New Zealand, apart from Auckland, will move to COVID Alert Level 2 at 11:59pm tomorrow. However, the Prime Minister has announced 2 major changes to the Level 2 rules. Jacinda Ardern says face coverings will be mandatory at most indoor venues and a maximum of only 50 people can gather at those venues. Auckland remains at Level 4 until at least next Tuesday, but the Prime Minister says people in Northland will be able to travel through Auckland for work if they need to.
People will need to travel directly without stopping while going through Auckland. You'll also need to carry evidence of the purpose of travel and the location where you are travelling to.
Cabinet will review the alert level settings for the whole country next Monday. The COVID-19 Response Minister does not know how many businesses will be able to operate under Level 2. Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint it's difficult to calculate.
I think that they've got more flexibility under Level 2 than they've had previously under Level 3 and 4, but the reality of dealing with COVID-19 is that we're stepping down because there is still a residual risk out there. And the last thing that those businesses and those venues want to see is us having to go back up alert levels because somewhere along the way the system fell down.
Chris Hipkins says a lot of businesses wouldn't have more than 50 people visiting at a time. The head of the main nurses union says the unsettling admittance to Middlemore Hospital of a patient with COVID-19 reflects a health system under pressure. Keri Nuku of the nurses organisation says understaffing makes it hard to maintain the right systems in a hospital.
It seems to be that the areas where the patient came from and where the patient's at, there were staffing issues, which unfortunately sometimes this sort of pressure on the health system does often come up with some fails.
Keri Nuku says the union wants to see adequate support for nursing staff whose colleagues have to self-isolate. Detectives investigating the Lynmore terror attack have finished their scene examination. The police say they will no longer be present there, but will continue their regular patrols. They say it will be up to the mall and supermarket management to decide when they reopen to the public. The police say they will keep speaking to witnesses over the next few days. 4 of the injured remain in hospital, all in a stable condition. 1 of the 3 people in intensive care is expected to be moved to a ward later today. An iwi representative at the Taranaki Regional Council has accused its resource management director of blocking proper consultation over consent applications. Emily Bailey told the Consents and Regulatory meeting the director, Fred McClay, is destroying relationships with iwi and hapu. She says consents are being approved by the council without cultural impact reports, which are a statutory requirement.
We don't want to go to court over this, but it's pretty clear that there is a block with the director of consents. All iwi are saying with this. We're completely frustrated.
Emily Bailey says staff at council want to help iwi and hapu with the consultation process. Fred McClay says the issue is being dealt with at a council workshop. TVNZ has confirmed that a One News camera operator is doing well after being pushed to the ground during a live cross. It says he and a member of the public were knocked over during an interview with the Covid-19 modeller Sean Hendy. It says the police are at the scene and the cameraman has been treated by ambulance staff. Moving now into sports news, the fate of All Black fullback Jordie Barrett will be decided tonight by the SANZAR Judicial Committee. Barrett was sent off in the All Blacks' win over the Wallabies in Perth yesterday because when he went up to take a high kick, his foot hit the head of Australian winger Marika Koroyan-Betty. All Blacks assistant coach Scott McLeod says if Barrett is suspended further, they'll challenge it. But he feels the fact Barrett was in the air at the time will work in his favour.
We believe we do have a defence, though. There's some mitigating circumstances from our side, so we'll put forward a case, yep.
There are 12 new caps in the Black Ferns squad named to play England and France in 4 tests in October and November. Les Elder returns to captain the side. England will resume tonight on 77 for none on the final day of the 4th cricket test against India at Oval in London, needing 368 for victory. The 5-match series is level at 1-1. Canadian teenager Leylah Fernandez has continued her remarkable run at the US Tennis Open, beating 2016 champion Angelique Kerber to advance to the quarterfinals. Fernandez, who has already beaten another former champion, Naomi Osaka, will now play 5th seed Elina Svitolina for a semi-final spot. And finally, New Zealand mountain biker Sam Gaze has recorded a season-best 11th placing at the penultimate round of the World Cup in Switzerland. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Clark Peterson covers more stories of Africans and African Americans making music in Europe, this time during the First World War. From the banjo bands that were all the rage in Britain, to France's love affair with Harlem bandleader James Reese. Ricky Swinell looks back on another weekend of lockdown sport, while Mark Rogers has a lot of recently departed musicians to pay tribute to on Nashville Babylon. It's all on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, on air, online and on demand. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Ratu Tuesday. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Partly cloudy with isolated showers, rain spreading east for a time tomorrow, heavy and possibly thundery. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow with rain for a time. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, cloud increasing, rain for a time tomorrow, then showers with possible thunderstorms in Kapiti. Bulla to Fiordland, rain or showers, heavy and possibly thundery at times, snow to 500 metres in the south. For Nelson and Marlborough, showers turning to rain tonight, heavy and possibly thundery, easing tomorrow evening. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, high cloud, rain or showers in Southland and Clutha from tonight, and snow lowering to around 600 metres tomorrow. Scattered rain elsewhere, mainly in the high country, severe nor'west gales in exposed places. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower tomorrow. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Ratu Tuesday. The time is 7 minutes past 6.
Ngā mihi, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint if you're just joining us. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. From midnight tomorrow, all New Zealand, barring Auckland, will move to Alert Level 2, but not Level 2 as you remember it. The Prime Minister's calling it Level 2 Delta, with the beefed up restrictions given the greater risk posed by the Delta strain.
The ability to keep moving down levels across so much of New Zealand is testament to everybody's hard work, but it doesn't mean we're out of the woods. To account for Delta, Level 2 will be different to how it's been before. As I've said many times, Delta has changed the game, so in order to beat it, we've had to adapt our game plan too.
The new game plan means widespread mask use, with people required to wear a face covering inside most public venues, shops, malls, bars and restaurants, but not schools or universities. The rules around public gatherings have also been tightened. Just 50 people can gather indoors, half the previous limit. The cap stretches to 100 at outdoor venues.
Moving to Level 2 is progress, though, and it is positive, but it comes with a warning. We've done so well to get this outbreak under control. Level 4 restrictions are working, but the job is not done. We're within sight of elimination, but we cannot drop the ball.
As rules relax outside of Auckland, the city's boundaries are more important than ever, a key defence to keep the virus contained. Those living in Northland will be able to travel through the region but won't be allowed to stop. Essential workers coming in and out must now be tested for COVID-19 every week and carry proof. South Islanders say they're relieved and excited to be returning to Level 2 tomorrow night. Tess Brunton has more.
In Marlborough, Arbour restaurant owner Liz Buttermore has been preparing for every scenario for the past couple of days.
Yeah, I think we're probably all feeling pretty lucky. It's expected, but again, nothing's expected, is it, in this last year and a half. So, yeah, feeling really great that we can start planning to have guests back in our venue again.
Under Delta Level 2, indoor events are restricted to 50 people and people will be required to wear a mask inside public venues. Masks can be removed at bars and restaurants for eating and drinking, but wait staff will be required to be masked. Liz isn't going to open their doors until Friday night, saying their dinner party kits will remain on the menu for Wednesday and Thursday instead.
Because our style of menu, to be able to order right now after briefing, to start preparing 7-course menu options for guests. It was just nice to just go ahead and commit to something for our guests and our suppliers. So Wednesday, Thursday, we are fully booked for our Arbour at Home offering, and we feel really good that we are in that position.
Queenstown Lakes District Mayor Jim Bolt is very pleased with the decision.
I think that's a sensible decision and one that we widely applauded in our part of the world. It'll enable businesses to get underway, albeit still restricted a bit, but look a whole lot better than what we have had.
He expects the ski fields and an incoming fresh dump of snow will attract people from both islands to visit his district.
We're going to be on rations a little because it's only going to be New Zealand outside of Auckland. Auckland's probably 55% of our domestic market. So, it's not going to be normal, but better than we had before.
Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Leanne Watson welcomes the news and says businesses will too.
Today's announcement will be very welcomed by our community in the South Island and in particular by our business community. According to Westpac, we know that in Level 3, they estimate that lost activity is around 300 million per week for the rest of the country in Level 3 and around 600 million per week while Auckland are in lockdown. So it's a significant impact when we are at those higher alert levels. So yes, very welcome that we'll be moving to Level 2.
The shift to Level 2 will mean plenty of restrictions and added costs for businesses, but Leanne Watson says it's a positive shift.
What was interesting today is we haven't yet had any certainty on when we may move from Level 2 to Level 1. Level 1 is where we can get further parts of the economy back up and running and under not such tight restrictions. So we will certainly be awaiting with interest what the timeline is on that as we get the announcement next Monday.
South Island businesses are excited to start work again and reopen their doors on Wednesday.
Okay, so for feedback from you all, this is on the footpath etiquette and keeping 2 metres apart from everyone. This listener says, I live in Papakura and walk every day. I found that others are almost always respectful of social distancing. Maybe because I'm grey-haired and masked, they often step up the footpath or boardwalk to allow space. I always say hi and thanks if appropriate, most at least nod. On the subject of testing people who are essential workers crossing Auckland's border, Martin has said, or Hamish from Martin has said, I don't see why COVID truckers can't be tested at weigh stations as part of normal safety checks supervised by police. Good point, Hamish. Thanks for your feedback. 2101 on the text. Lawyers say there was an opportunity for the Middlemore terrorist to be deported if he was considered a national security threat. But the government says that couldn't have happened because the man was appealing against the cancellation of his refugee status and they had to wait for the outcome. Jordan Bond reports.
Simon Laurent, an immigration lawyer, says the government did have the option to deport Samsudeen if they decided he was a threat to national security. He says it would need the immigration minister and then the Governor-General to sign it off.
They would need to have some pretty solid grounds in order to proceed with deportation. It could have been reasonable suspicion, but I would suggest that if a ministerial certification was required, they would need some fairly cogent basis for making that direction. I'm not sure if they had that at that time.
While Immigration New Zealand was investigating, they also discovered his refugee application was fraudulent and eventually cancelled it on those grounds in early 2019. The man did have a legitimate right to appeal that decision on humanitarian grounds, which was to be heard by the Immigration and Protection Tribunal.
The one argument would be that process should have been exhausted first. The other thing is that it would have been less contentious for the government to have allowed him to complete that IPT process rather than make a fairly bold step to direct his deportation because of being a national security threat.
The chair of the Auckland District Law Society's Immigration and Refugee Law Committee, Stuart Daly, agreed. He said as a refugee, the man could have been forced to leave the country had he been deemed a significant enough threat. But a spokesperson for the Immigration Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the law doesn't allow a deportation while the man was appealing his refugee status being cancelled. This appeal was lodged in April 2019 and was scheduled to happen this month, 2.5 years later, but was ultimately never heard. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, backed that up, that it was not possible to deport him during the appeal process, but says this was not a satisfactory situation. She said the government will look at that.
I am just going to give us a bit of time to work through some of those options. They're not going to be, it won't be quick, but I think it does warrant us exploring, because most New Zealanders will say, well, if you acted fraudulently in gaining that status and you're a threat to national security, surely there are some mechanisms that we can use there. So that's what we're exploring.
A further complication emerged around the time the man's criminal case wrapped up in July. The government received Crown Law advice that the man was likely deemed a protected person under international law, which meant it would be even harder to deport him. That special protected status, immigration officials say, overrides national security.
It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Starting a new job can be stressful enough, but some have been forced to do it during lockdown. While many organisations have overcome the challenges with working from home, it can be a whole new ballgame for people fresh into their roles. Jake McKee reports.
When New Zealand was locked down last month, Jacob Davies was in the final days of his job in Wellington before starting a job in Christchurch the next week.
The hardest aspects were didn't have a laptop, didn't have technology really, was trying to work off an iPad with an organisation whose systems wouldn't work with the iPad. So it was sort of a couple of weeks before I could get a laptop couried out to me.
He says it's been difficult starting a new job in lockdown.
I anticipated going into an office, having face-to-face meetings, learning the organisation, meeting people, but being thrown into online and kind of just sitting there going, well, is someone going to give me a call? Is someone going to get in touch? But the employer's been fantastic about it and really worked quite well. They had experience with starting people during lockdown last year.
Mr Davies made the snap decision to head to his new home in Christchurch in the brief window it was allowed.
The Tuesday night of lockdown, when it was announced, moved from, was in Taranaki for work, then had to go back to Wellington, then had to get on a ferry on Wednesday morning to get down here, quite rushed.
Callum Lewis has been in his new job for 2 weeks. The problem is the job's in Auckland, which is at alert level 4, and he's in Wellington and doesn't know when he can move.
It's lucky that I have flexible accommodation in Wellington and Auckland, so I haven't been out of pocket in any way for that. But I feel like it could easily have happened that I'd signed a lease or whatever.
Even though Mr Lewis has moved into a similar role to his job in Wellington, he feels like he's learning the ropes slower than he should be.
You pick up so much by just sitting next to someone and just asking them a quick question. And when you're, not there, you sort of have to make a decision about whether or not it's worth picking up the phone to ask the question or leaving it.
Harry Bates took a week's break before starting his new job. He was at his family's holiday home in Hanmer Springs when the lockdown hit, and he's decided to stay instead of heading back to Wellington.
During the lockdown in 2020, I was stuck in a small apartment with 3 others, so the appeal of being in a house in the mountains just was, a no-brainer.
Mr Bates's main issue was because he was on holiday, he had limited clothing.
I had 1 shirt, so I wore that on the first day, and then everyone was wearing T-shirts and caps, so I was lucky.
Organisational psychologist John Eatwell says employers need to recognise the extra challenges of lockdown. He says new jobs can be stressful and leave people exhausted at first.
Certainly there's been research on that which shows really that the first 3 months of your job in a new job is one of the most stressful life events, up with moving house or moving city. And of course, some people combine all three.
Mr. Eatwell says there's studies indicating working from home isn't necessarily the way of the future people thought at the start of the pandemic. He says people's output is being impacted by not physically working alongside colleagues, as some things just don't work as well online. It's something Air 2 Union team leader Amy Hansen is aware of, having helped to place many people into a wide range of new jobs during the pandemic.
One of the scariest prospects for people was working remotely, for people who had been never in that space before, people who might be in the later stages of their kind of employable life and not really used technology in their jobs before.
Ms Hansen says employers need to be patient and kind, and for anyone starting a new job to remember, you can teach an old dog new tricks.
The lockdown has some people reaching for the bottle, with helplines seeing an increase in calls about loved ones drinking too much. Hamish Cardwell has more.
The stresses of lockdown has had South Island man Jason turning to the bottle.
To sustain a cooler disposition around cagey children. Yeah. So the kids are basically losing their shit all the time. So me and Mum are just sitting down and drinking wine a lot more often than we would. A lot more wine and a lot more crafty beers, a lot more.
His drinking has more than doubled, from a few beers on the weekend to basically every evening.
I see it as a boredom killer at the moment, and coping, I guess, as a stress coping mechanism because of trying to house hunt, having 8 of us in the house from 3 generations, and then the other family shit that's going on at the moment. So it's kind of been quietening thoughts, I guess you'd say.
Justin Lester from the research firm Loves Data says alcohol sales jumped nearly 500% before lockdown 3 weeks ago. Since then, online booze sales have been roaring along.
Say, for example, on the 23rd of August alone, alcohol spend online was up 417% nationally compared with last year.
Justin Lester says while it does not have access to supermarket alcohol sales data, the numbers seem to indicate people are imbibing more.
More alcohol is certainly being purchased. So as average transactions are much larger in size, and the number of transactions is also significantly up. Whether or not that leads to post-lockdown people spending less on alcohol, that could be the case because they have stockpiled. But what we're continuing to see is people are drinking more.
Regional Wines and Spirits warehouse manager Stephen Prentice says its sales are slightly down on normal. He says last lockdown, people got stuck into the less common wine varieties, while this time round, Belgian beer and specialty spirits are surging in popularity.
We're finding people that are trying whiskies, and we're finding that the demand for local gin is huge. Instead of buying the regular Gordons and Bombay Tanqueray, they're stepping out and buying locally produced gins, and that's becoming a huge market.
A survey after last year's level 4 lockdown by Te Herenga Hauora, the health promotion agency, showed 1 in 5 people drank more, a third drank less, while half stayed about the same. While there are not yet figures this time around, David Kodaya from the National Telehealth Service Whakarongaro says there has been an increase in people calling concerned about how much they or their loved ones are drinking.
One of the key things that would indicate that you have a problem with your drinking is when other people are worried about it. So I think it's the fact that family whānau members or flatmates, friends are ringing with a concern about drinking with someone they know.
Alcohol Health Watch Executive Director Dr. Nikki Jackson says making liquor easily available via delivery as an essential product during lockdown does not help people make healthy choices in a time of significant stress. She's particularly irate about what she sees as broadcast media personalities endorsing drinking to cope during lockdown.
That's simply just not acceptable. It's an incredibly harmful drug. People are kind of trapped in their homes. We know that alcohol fuels domestic violence. It increases the likelihood and severity of family harm. And you've got children around. It's important that, we're not modelling drinking as a way to cope.
Dr. Nikki Jackson says anyone wanting help for problem drinking should call or text 1737, speak to their doctor or a Māori health provider.
A bill banning conversion therapy is causing confusion among some churches. Concerns have been raised about how far the proposed legislation goes and whether parents could be criminalised for having conversations with their children about their sexuality or gender identity. Alicia Foon reports.
The debate surrounding the conversion therapy ban is heating up, but misinterpretations are causing fear within some families. The bill aims to protect people from conversion practices intended to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Former pastor and now lead advisor at the Human Rights Commission, Andre Afamasaga, spent 15 years following conversion therapy practices. He attended courses, conferences, and read books hoping to turn straight, afraid it would bring cultural and religious shame upon his family. He says this belief, deeply rooted in guilt and shame, almost ended his life.
I was absolutely feeling suicidal, feeling depressed. My campaign to try to change my sexuality and to try to become straight had absolutely consumed me. Despite concerted effort and energy, nothing happened. And it really made me just question my relationship with God, but also me as a person. I felt like I was not doing the right things that people told me that I needed to do to become straight.
He says his 40th birthday became a turning point in his life when he came to terms with his reality.
And I found out that conversion practices absolutely do not work at all, and I had been wasting my time, and I was deceived this entire time. Then that began a journey of me coming out of the closet and accepting who I was. Today I can proudly call myself a gay Seymour man who is Christian or has Christian beliefs.
Last week, one of New Zealand's largest churches, Arise Church, in a media statement, said it was 100% against therapy or practices, but thinks the bill goes too far, claiming it was a horrific attack on the freedom of religion and the rights of parents. The release was sent after a mass email to its congregation asking them to make a submission, which was also supported by 17 other Pentecostal churches. But Conversion Therapy Action Group co-founder Chanel Lal says parental and pastoral support or counselling is not a crime under this bill.
The bill is clear that that is not the case. Advising your children to not take puberty blockers will not be criminalized, or having a conversation does not meet the definition of a practice, and it certainly does not meet the threshold for criminalization. The bill criminalizes acts rather than omissions, and failing to do something is an omission.
Lal says the bill ensures freedom of religion is upheld.
Religious groups have been given a significant leeway to express their anti-queer views if that's what they choose to do, and it is utterly false to argue that this bill will abrogate prayer or freedom of speech in any way. They have sent out not only misleading information, they have intentionally omitted information that allows people to continue practicing their religion. I have had conversations with people from Arise. The people that have put these messages out are leaders. People look up to them, people believe them, and that is why it is so dangerous.
Arise declined interview requests and later removed the original press release, replacing it with a new version. Justice Minister Chris Hipkins also declined multiple invitations to be interviewed, but did provide a statement. The bill does not change the current law around decisions concerning the healthcare of children and will not undermine the supportive role of parents, guardians and whānau. Its purpose is to deter harmful behaviour. It will not inhibit prayer intended to support people, but could make practices such as exorcisms to cast out homosexuality illegal. But a pastor giving a sermon denouncing homosexuality and gender diversity would not. A family that is struggling to accept or is openly opposed to their child's sexuality or gender identity would not be considered to be performing a conversion practice unless they take some further action to intentionally persuade or force the child to change. Reverend Moa Strixenpour says he's disappointed some churches have misinterpreted the bill.
There has been a misinformation, fear-mongering, and also in terms of perpetuating ignorance, in terms of not allowing real debate and discussion in our families and in our communities. Using fear to generate a discussion is not the way forward. What's needed is the aroha, the alofa, the agape of God.
He says conversion practices are unloving and inhumane. New Zealand Christian Network National Director Reverend Dr Stuart Lang agrees, but says although the Justice Minister's reassurances are heading in the right direction, he needs to see it in writing within the bill.
New Clause G, respectful and open discussions regarding sexuality and gender, and advice, guidance, prayer or support given to anyone by anyone else, including parents, family members, friends, counsellors, religious leaders or health professionals, when such advice or support is requested and is respectful and non-coercive. So that would really address everything that concerns us, but we'd like to see it actually spelt out in the bill.
Reverend Moore Strixon-Poore says diversity of opinions exist within the church, but all, if not most congregations agree harmful conversion practices should be banned.
I see an opportunity for the church to step up and also try to be a bridge, try to say to our conservative family members, can we please sit around the table to try and engage with our children who are saying that they are all these things that scare the old church, gay, lesbian, bisexual, non-binary, but they are our children, they are our family. We love them and we try to move forward together.
He says Aotearoa owes it to future generations to protect them from practices which cause psychological harm. Public submissions for the bill close on September 8th.
And before we head off, some feedback from Paul, who says it makes no sense to me to wear a mask in a library in level 2, yet I can take a mask off for long periods of time in a bar or restaurant to eat and drink. These are really high-risk venues. Well, maybe tune in tomorrow morning. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, 5 a.m. tomorrow, masking up. First up looks at Delta and all the rules and etiquette in public places.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. Some hospitality businesses believe they will struggle to operate as customer numbers are limited under level 2. All of New Zealand, apart from Auckland, will move to a tighter COVID alert level 2 at 11:59 p.m. tomorrow. The Director General of Health says a patient who tested positive for COVID-19 while on a ward at Middlemore Hospital should